What if an entire country suddenly went dark? Not because of a storm, not because of an attack, but because the system itself could no longer hold together. That is exactly what happened in Cuba, where more than 11 million people were plunged into darkness after a complete nationwide blackout. This wasn't just another power outage. It was a total collapse of the electrical grid, a moment that revealed how deep the country's crisis has become. As the news broke, officials confirmed what many feared. The entire system had experienced what they called a complete disconnection. There was no single failure point identified, no obvious explosion or external attack. Instead, it appeared to be the result of a fragile system finally giving way under pressure. Across Havana and beyond, the impact was immediate. As night fell, homes were lit by candles instead of electricity. Families gathered in dim rooms, trying to stay calm while uncertainty spread. For many, this was not a new experience, but it felt worse than before. Because this wasn't the first time. In fact, it was the third major blackout in just 4 months. And with each new failure, the situation has become more serious. Government crews rushed to restore power, focusing first on restarting thermoelectric plants, the backbone of Cuba's electricity system. But even officials admitted the process had to be slow and careful. When systems are weak, bringing them back online too quickly can cause further damage. By late night, only a small portion of power had been restored, reaching a fraction of residents and a few critical facilities like hospitals. Even then, authorities warned that these restored circuits could fail again at any moment. For ordinary people, the blackout quickly turned into a daily struggle for survival. Without electricity, food began to spoil. Refrigerators stopped working. In a country already facing shortages, losing even small amounts of food can have serious consequences. Elderly citizens were among the hardest hit. Without fans or cooling systems in the tropical heat, many were left in dangerous conditions. Medical needs became harder to manage, and for families without generators or backup systems, there was simply no alternative. One resident described having no choice but to prepare sleeping spaces in open areas, hoping to stay cool enough through the night. Others spoke about watching their limited food supplies go bad, unable to preserve what little they had. But this crisis did not appear overnight. For years, Cuba's electrical grid has been deteriorating. Much of the infrastructure is outdated, with systems that are far beyond their intended lifespan. Maintenance has been limited, not necessarily due to lack of awareness, but due to lack of resources. Experts have pointed out that keeping the system running at all has required constant effort under difficult conditions. But over time, the strain has increased. In recent months, daily power outages had already become part of life. People adjusted their routines around electricity schedules. They planned meals and daily activities based on when power would be available. Then came an even bigger problem: fuel shortages. Cuba relies heavily on imported oil to generate electricity. But in recent months, those supplies have been significantly reduced. In some cases, shipments have not arrived for extended periods. Officials confirmed that the country has been operating using a combination of solar power, natural gas, and thermoelectric plants. However, these sources have not been enough to meet demand. As a result, critical services began to suffer. Hospitals were forced to delay surgeries. Essential operations became harder to maintain. The impact of the energy crisis spread into every part of daily life. And behind this situation lies a broader geopolitical tension. Cuban officials have pointed to policies from the United States, particularly under Donald Trump, as a contributing factor. Earlier in 2026, the U.S. warned that countries supplying oil to Cuba could face economic consequences, including tariffs. This move increased pressure on Cuba's already fragile supply lines. Oil shipments slowed, and in some cases stopped entirely. At the same time, the United States made clear its demands. These included political and economic reforms, as well as the release of political prisoners. In return, there was the possibility of easing sanctions. However, the situation became even more complex when discussions about Cuba's political leadership emerged. Reports indicated that the U.S. administration was interested in leadership changes, specifically involving Miguel Díaz-Canel. While official details remain limited, it is clear that negotiations between the two countries have been taking place behind the scenes. All of this has created a situation where internal challenges and external pressures are combining at the same time. The blackout, in this context, is not just a technical failure. It is the result of multiple factors coming together: aging infrastructure, fuel shortages, economic constraints, and geopolitical tension. Experts warn that if the situation continues, the consequences could extend beyond electricity. There is concern about long-term economic collapse. If industries cannot operate and basic services cannot function, the broader economy may struggle to survive. There is also concern about social unrest. When people face constant shortages and uncertainty, frustration can grow. And perhaps most significantly, there is the possibility of increased migration. Historically, economic and social crises in Cuba have led to waves of people leaving the island in search of better conditions. This is why the situation is being closely watched, not just within Cuba, but internationally. Countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada are paying attention, understanding that developments in Cuba can have wider regional effects. At the same time, there is discussion about potential support from other global players. Some analysts suggest that countries like China could step in to provide renewable energy solutions or financial assistance. However, such involvement would also shift geopolitical dynamics, creating new alliances and dependencies. Meanwhile, Cuban authorities are attempting to respond. New economic measures are being considered, including allowing Cubans living abroad to invest in businesses and participate in large-scale projects. There are also efforts to encourage foreign currency accounts and partnerships with private companies. These steps are aimed at stabilizing the economy and attracting resources. But these are long-term solutions. The immediate reality remains difficult. Even as power is gradually restored, the system remains unstable. Officials have already warned that restored circuits could fail again. This means that for many residents, uncertainty continues. They do not know when the next blackout might happen. They do not know how long the current crisis will last. And they do not know whether the system can fully recover. From a global perspective, the situation raises important questions. How should countries respond to humanitarian challenges linked to political and economic policies? What role should international powers play in stabilizing or influencing smaller nations? And how can long-term solutions be implemented in a way that addresses both immediate needs and structural problems? For now, there are no simple answers. What is clear is that the blackout in Cuba is more than just a temporary disruption. It is a sign of a system under extreme stress, a system that has been pushed to its limits. and a reminder of how quickly essential services can fail when multiple pressures converge. As the lights slowly begin to return in some areas, the larger challenge remains unresolved because restoring electricity is only one part of the solution. Stabilizing the system, economically, politically, and socially, is a much bigger task. And until that happens, the risk of another blackout will continue to loom over the country. For millions of people in Cuba, this is not just a news story. It is daily life, a life defined by uncertainty, adaptation, and waiting. Waiting for stability, waiting for relief, and waiting for the moment when the lights come back and stay on.